What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm a game designer on the Summoner's Rift team, responsible for the live balance updates in the patch, and patch 13.14 is upon us. Of course, the important thing about this patch is that Soul Fighter, that arena is here. Very exciting stuff. However, I did not personally work on that mode. I did not personally work on the Fury, another cool thing coming in here as well. So I'm going to skip over that stuff and talk about the live balance updates and the systems updates that are happening to the patch. Actually, a fairly large live balance update, a pretty big slew of nerfs, a pretty big slew of buffs, lots of system updates here as well. Let's talk about some of the rationale behind them, how big the changes are going to be. If you want an even bigger deep dive on why we did what we did in this patch, I recorded a patch preview last week, which has a lot of context on why a lot of these things happened and some of the expectation setting going forward. I'm going to try to make this a somewhat shorter video as it's already 11:30 at night for me. I've got work tomorrow, so let's get into it. Mid-season ends very, very soon. I personally ended Diamond 2 0 LP. I was one win from Diamond 1. I was Diamond 1 early in the season. Fell all the way to 0. Partially my fault. So we stopped there about top 1.8%. We'll see how I can do next split, but that's where I ended. So at least, anyway, whatever. Let's move on. Excited for next split, though. Excited for all the changes here. Again, not my changes either, although I think it's all really, really cool stuff. I think great work by the Game Loop team. Let's talk about the fact that, ooh, baby, was disabled until patch 13.15. Anyway, yeah, just by the way, visible rank is still active, but hey, anyway, just that's a thing. Okay. Anyway, Soul Fighter exists, looks really, really cool. Again, not my thing, so I'm not going to get into it. Okay, let's talk about live balance updates. Now we are finally here. Okay, first one alphabetically, as always, will be Aatrox with the double A's. The overall goal is one. This champ has been weak for a while, and so deserving of buffs. I've been pushing for Aatrox buffs for a while. We finally got time to do them. This is a nudge in the direction of top lane agency. It is a very light one, but I'm trying to push us toward giving top laners better scaling. There's a bunch of stuff we can do around top lane. It's probably going to be a lot of micro adjustments over time, but this is a very, very light touch toward top lane agency. It is, hey, top lane can be a source of carrying a little bit more, and for any top lane changes that I am personally shipping, I'm usually going to try to push towards, well, their carry threat is higher. Their carry threat is higher. If there's a buff, it's their carry threat is higher. If there's a nerf, it's probably that you don't 1v1 somebody at level 1 and the lane instantly ends. We can go directionally in a certain direction. If I ever get a sprint where it's like, no, all you're going to do is go do top lane agency work, we can do that. But this is at least a nudge in the right direction. I talked more about this in the preview video. There's about a 25-minute soliloquy about why it's actually really tough to do top lane agency the right way. Anyway, it is an AD ratio buff to Aatrox. It is a very, very light early inning phase nerf to Aatrox. It is late game wave clear, feeling better. This is one of the other designers, Phlox, who suggested this one to me. Very, very smart choice. And so let's talk about the numbers. Flashbang warning. Here we go. Okay, so this is the base damage if you never have any runes or anything here in the build. By level 11, it'll once again break even and go ahead, and it's a buff in the lake no matter what. This is a nearly linear interpolation of basically what is the most common rune page, what is the most common starting item, which for Aatrox, by the way, is Doran's Shield. And then interpolating toward a 3 completed item build. Not counting things like Conqueror, but I am counting things like Stat Shards. And so as you trend towards 3 completed items, the most common 3 completed item build, I believe, is Eclipse, Cleaver, or something. I don't remember what it is off my head. I think it's Death Stance. Regardless, up to about 13% more damage here. This column says how much bonus AD do you need, including runes, to make this change a buff. Again, it doesn't require very, very much. This is, of course, pretty much just a buff for the champion, aside from the fact that unless you actually complete a recall here, you do actually need the 25 or so bonus AD to hit here. And so unless you're recalling level 4 for a longsword or 2, you're actually not getting in the green right away, but directionally is kind of what's going on with the champion. So there's those changes. Of course, with the AD ratio going up pretty substantially from 80% to 100%, there's, of course, the chance that the ulti, which gives you even more AD, is a really, really huge buff. It is not gigantic massive. It's obviously meaningful, right? Your primary damage tool can do up to 16% more damage on rank 3 ulti on a 3 completed item build plus boots, which is, reasonably well into the late game. But hey, here's the numbers. Clearly an Aatrox buff. Definitely could be really, really valuable. Obviously, the minion wave for Lake is going to feel like a lot as well. Yep, big Aatrox buffs. I think he's going to be very, very strong. We have quite a few patches until Worlds. Some regions will be playing this patch in their postseason, so we'll get some pro play data here as well. Rest assured, we do not want Aatrox to be 100% presence at Worlds. We want Aatrox to be a present top laner so that there are a slew of carry options for pros to play around, because I think that is a very healthy thing for the game. If top lane has plenty of carries, that means top lane can carry. If top lane is all tanks, top lane cannot carry, right? So champion roster is, I would say, as important as systemic changes are. At least live balance systemic changes are for things like role agency, and so Aatrox, a bigger carry, at least nudges in the correct direction. Okay, moving forward. Diana, pretty much strict buffs. Diana is actually a champion that I had. We almost buffed for MSI. Ultimately, we decided to go for a slightly lower risk. We only did like the Nidalee and Lee Sin buffs for getting spicer things into MSI, but spent some time. Okay, it's finally time to get Diana in the sun. Ironic, I know, but anyway, shipping pretty small changes. I did not personally implement these, but I think they are good changes all the same. So it is a small base value and AP ratio increase to the shield, a small AP ratio increase to the W damage, and a small AP ratio increase to the E damage. Gold in solo queue is actually really so it's interesting because in solo queue, even across MMR, so there's like some variation, by any like mid to late game timing, junglers have the same amount of gold as other lanes do. So jungler versus top versus mid versus bot, the amount of gold these lanes have is actually all relatively close together in solo queue. In pro play, people funnel much, much more. Junglers lose a lot of gold, and AD carries are given a lot more gold. But for solo queue, junglers have a very similar amount of gold to mid laners. On average, it's within a couple percent, like it's not a very big difference. And so any kind of AP ratio change will be relatively flat across roles, not counting support. And so part of what's happening here is that. So here's the numbers on the Diana change. This is, again, looking at an example 3-item build, interpolating from her most common role. I forget if her most common role is mid or jungle, but whichever it was, I took that rune page, that item start, and then interpolated into the standard 3-item build. And so this is the shield power before and after, pretty much a solid 10, 12, 15% more shielding. Here is the damage of all three orbs combined. It starts at 1%, goes to 8%, because at level 1 you have very, very little AP. So a pure AP ratio buff, of course, is not going to be really felt at level 1, but you're going to feel it later on down the line. This is actually just E damage, it's not W, but the E damage, again, it's only an AP ratio change of 0.1, so you don't really see it until it manifests later on in the build. But here you go, the change on E damage. So overall, yes, there are 4 individual buffs, right? E ratio, W ratio, W ratio, W base, but they're all quite small, and the end result is about 10% stronger abilities on the W and the E. Of course, the passive Q are unchanged. Those are also meaningful. So obviously not her entire power budget went up by 10%, but a decent portion of her kit went up by 10%. Pretty solid buff to Diana. She should be pretty strong next patch. Next up is Hecarim, 10 armor and MR off of Spirit of Dread. The ultimate logic here is the fewer free resists you get from W, the more you have to rely on resists to not die. If Assassin Hecarim, which is Duskblade Manamune, cannot one-shot its target and then Duskblade and get out, if that is not going to be successful, Hecarim is much more likely to die unless he builds a Death Dance, a Cleaver, a Trinity Force, something else with durability onto it. This is maybe not the last change we're going to see of Hecarim. This is a champion who has rested on the knife's edge a lot. We actually had a really brief pow about him earlier today. Someone on the team brought up an example changes of like a longer form look at him. We gave some feedback. We'll see if we get a larger scope of Hecarim changes somewhere down the line. If we decide, yes, we want to push him into fighter builds, where at the levels, what do we do? There's a chance we see like a fighter skewed Hecarim change later on in the year. We'll see. Either way, this is a change that says, look, the fewer free resists you get, the more you need to build a Death Dance and a Maw in order to survive. I think that is directionally pretty reasonable. Obviously, it's going to be a strict nerfed Hecarim. This is a patch where we are buffing an item that he buys fairly frequently in Spear of Shojin. Hecarim also, just a relatively snowbally frustrating champion. Reasonable choice here overall. So here is the math on Hecarim, assuming he is not building any durability, or at least any armor and MR. Here is the amount of armor he has, the amount of MR he has with his W, before and after the changes, and the amount of durability he has as a result afterwards. And it's a solid, 6% durability decrease to the champion, which is definitely meaningful, definitely going to be felt. And again, if you build Death Dance, if you build Maw, if you build Merc Treads, things like this, the amount this matters goes down a little bit here. So a meaningful hit here to Hecarim. Gonna definitely lose quite a bit of win rate. Similar to Hecarim, we are buffing Spear of Shojin this patch, and this is an item that Jax builds very frequently by item 3. This was a bug with the patchwork or midscope, whatever that happened earlier on in the year. The R got dropped to 50 mana cost, back to 100. Ultis almost always cost 100 mana unless they have a very specific reason not to. I think Zoe R does not cost 100, as its cooldown is way too short for that to be fair for her. Counter-Strike increased by a 1 second cooldown. Fairly meaningful here as well, of course. So, again, pretty light touches. The buff to Jax is an item he buys sometimes, is getting a bit stronger. This is not huge. Jax, I would like to be strong. I think Jax does good things for pro play. He is a prevalent carry top in pro. I think that is a good thing for the viability of multiple strategies in pro play. It means there's some amount of split pushing that can happen, some amount of silent pressure that can happen. That is a good thing for the spectacle of pro play overall. So trying to continue to have roughly 2/3 of top laners be damage-oriented champions, whether they're fighters or mages, and only about 1/3 be, income agnostic, low income sources, champions like tanks, right, who don't really care how much gold they have. It's fine that they are viable. It's fine that champions who have a weak top side can play somewhat washing top lane champions. Just like if you have a weak bot side, you could play things like Ashe or maybe even Varus, where it doesn't really matter if you win because you've got a lot of baseline utility, compared to someone like Jinx or Aphelios, where all you can deal is damage. I think it's good to have some of these champions in each role, both for solo queue and for pro play, by the way. I think it's good to have some champions out there where it's like, I will lose lane, but it's okay. I will lose gracefully and be useful to the team. I think it's useful to have those in every role. I think bot lane has too few of those right now, ultimately. But anyway, the direction of what we're going here is let's retain that there are some carries in the top lane. I think that's reasonably what's happening here. Okay. As far as the math is concerned, nothing too exciting here. 1 second cooldown difference on the ability you rank second. Here's the cooldown change. Nothing too exciting, but those are the numbers. Okay. Karthus is the next change coming up here. Karthus, we finally decided to nerf bot lane Karthus. He has been high win rate for a very, very long time. Several mages in bot lane are very, very successful. We see champs like Karthus, we see Seraphine, we see Swain, we see Ziggs. Cassiopeia is pretty good down there as well. I think before, Azir really, really, really cared about character level scaling. I think Azir could have been a reasonable bot laner as well, though not terribly popular. Regardless, Karthus is the most dominant of bot lane carries. He is a pretty acceptable jungler. His win rates are fine in jungle. He clears very, very fast. Okay, his ganks suck. Champions have to do something in each role, and Karthus is just the best at gold income. Karthus, by the way, is the highest gold income jungler in the game. No one's surprised by this, but yeah, he is the highest gold income jungler in the game statistically. Again, no shocks here, but it's basically taps down to Karthus in bot lane, and some compensation changes to relatively stay equal with Karthus jungle. Let's talk about the numbers as they are. First up is the Karthus Q monster damage. This is, again, assuming his normal jungle start of just the Hunter's Machete or whatever it's actually called, plus the normal amount of runes, interpolating toward a 3-item build. Of course, there's sort of fraudulent buffs like level 2 or 3 we hasn't recalled yet, but essentially you trend towards your monster damage by a 3-item build, being up to 5% more damage, 1% more damage in the early game, because even though the base damage is down by 2, the AP ratio is not cut by 5%, and that's overall, reasonable here. So monster damage is just kind of strictly higher, okay? But of course, you have to do something other than just farm the jungle and press R in teamfight. So there is, at some point, there's going to be, if a Lee Sin invades you, or you gank bot or top or whatever, and you're fighting with a rank 2 or a rank 3 Q, it is going to do a little bit less damage. Not a ton less damage. It's pretty small, all things considered. But hey, the amount of PvP damage you're losing compared to the amount of PvE damage you're gaining, relatively similar magnitudes here. Of course, level 1 jungle Karthus is not going to have this interaction ever, or this interaction ever. Probably this interaction either. But regardless, vaguely here the numbers what's going on. What it really does is say, hey, this actually nerfs the early laning phase of Karthus. This is, I believe, the isolated Q damage, right? We're doubling the 45 to 90, kind of the AP ratio here as well. And yeah, it's a little bit harder to last hit. You have a little bit worse trading if your Nautilus or whatever does go for hook at level 2 and you start trading. Well, you're going to do 4 less damage per lay waste. That means something. Does it mean a ton? No, but it means something. It's a little bit of extra power lost off the champion. And by level 9, it's of course the exact same character moving on. The other change, though, is this change to E. When you take down any minion or whatever, 5 less on the mana restore. This is actually bigger than you might think it is. So here is, let's say you always last hit with Q. Well, here is the functional mana cost of Q before and after. Of course, the mana cost is up by 5, which means, hey, the mana cost is sometimes, doubled at certain points in time, right? Based on when you're ranking E, based on how you're ranking Q. Here's the mana cost difference. Now, even for Karthus Jungle, by the way, who is, of course, dealing more damage directly with Qs, Karthus Jungle does run out of mana, you have to toggle off your E, you have to toggle off Defile, and limit the DPS of that ability, because you will run out even with blue buff on your first clear, which means the fact that, Raptors gives you, 30 less mana, the fact that, Gromp Blue plus Wolves together is going to give you 25 less mana, that's about 1 second less of Defile. Is that huge? Of course it's not huge. It's going to be, 20 less damage to Wolves as you do 1 less second of Defile. Well, your 20 less damage to Wolves is paid for by 10 more damage on Lay Waste. Is that going to make up for it? Yeah, almost certainly, right? Every single Lay Waste doing, 3 more damage, 2 more damage in your first clear or so. Yeah, it's probably going to pay for it, but hey, by the way, overall, this does have some effect on the champion, and of course, meaningfully more effect on the laner, because up until level 12, you are going to be net negative. I mean, even the entire time, it's still going to be net negative, but until you get to last chapter, until you get to Liandry's, you are going to have less mana in lane. Is it huge? No, it's not huge, but it is something. Stated another way, let's say you actually do get 12 CS per minute. What is the mana regen per minute of lane Karthus? And it's actually down meaningfully, right? It's down 20% until you finally get to rank 2 of the E, where it just goes plus 10, and it's such a meaningful power spike in mana regen. I mean, by this point, your last chapter is clearly done. By this point, you probably have Leander's on actually at level 8 on Karthus, but, pre-last chapter, this is actually a pretty meaningful mana regen decrease, assuming you last hit well. So, yep, this matters. This, I think, definitely is going to lower some bot lane win rate. It's not going to go sub 50% win rate. It's still going to be a strong bot laner, but directionally, good changes. Next up is a change to Kindred. So we are reverting the change that I made in the previous patch. Essentially, I had the theory that nerfing early dueling would be an elite skewed nerf to Kindred. They are reasonably balanced for low to mid MMRs and extremely overpowered at high MMRs. And I was like, well, if the early dueling is worse and you can't invade the Lee Sin because he'll kill you, or you're just not healthy enough to come away with a blue buff or go for an early gank or whatever. But this change ended up being about 0.75% win rate flat across all MMRs. And so the goal was like, well, we should just ship a heavier elite skewed nerf where we get the elite win rate nerf we actually wanted, and we have more bandwidth. Like, if our change is actually elite skewed, we can just go harder on that change and not hit lower MMR as much, because we don't have this flat nerf attached to it overall. So logically, right, it's like, well, let's revert something that was a flat nerf and ship a heavier nerf that is skewed. There's also Trinity Force changes in the patch, which I believe will be very, very lightly power negative on Marksman. We'll talk about that down the line, though. So let's talk about what's actually going on here, which is Dance of Arrows is losing 10 flat damage, and then the unempowered Dance of Arrows is losing a 1-second cooldown. So what's interesting is this exact change happened, I don't remember exactly when, but it's like roughly a year ago or something. And this ended up being, I believe, like 1.2% win rate, something around there. Then there was a second change, which was at some other point in time, that was this change plus 0 to 20 damage off of Dance of Arrows. So, 0 damage and then eventually minus 20 on rank 5 of the queue. That change, combined with the cooldown change, was 1.5% win rate. Now, I'm expecting that 0 to 20 on the queue was a bigger deal than the cooldown change, but, there's no way to, pry those apart, right? So this was 1 and change, and this is some fraction of 1 and change, and this was 0.75. So, by default, this, unless our numbers got really funky somehow and stuff broke down, this is overall a net nerf to Kindred from their current live state, and hopefully in a more elite skewed manner, to where we might see that Silver Kindred is relatively unchanged, but Elite Kindred is maybe down a full 1% or something from the current state that it is right now, that they are right now. So that's kind of the hope here with these changes. We can go ahead and look at the math on this real quick. This is assuming, again, interpolating toward a 3-item build on Kindred, which is Triforce, Cleaver, Wits End, as the most common 3-item build that we see out of Kindred on live right now. And it's a pretty early skewed nerf on the ability overall. Late game, as you build more damage, it does all that. And this just means directionally you're relying more on auto attacks for this champion, relying more on the buffs you get from marks, and less on base damages, which very, very lightly touches you away from bruiser builds. Not by a large amount by any means. Anyway, there was another chance, as I kind of wrote here. I wrote this context paragraph that basically, at some point, we might want to look at Kindred and decide if we really don't want them to build tanky, or if it's like, look, junglers are just going to build pretty durable. If they're going to get invaded on, they have to duel a Nidalee and a Lee Sin at various points in time. It's just natural that these champions are going to build a little bit tankier, and that, you know, you either give them a bunch of free durability with champions like Hecarim, which allows them to build Assassin, or you just say, yep, you're going to build, you know, some things like Gore Drinker Graves and whatnot, and Shield Bows and whatnot, or, again, Cleaver, Wit's End and stuff on Kindred. I don't know. It's a discussion we can have at some point in time. It's not an urgent change regardless, but this is meant to be a nerf to Kindred, and I believe it should be. Next is a big QOL set of changes to Lissandra. Of course, they are power positive. I'm generally the opinion that shipping a sort of big like QOL intended list, it's like you could just let it ship, and then people could be like, oh, that feels really good. And then the mains see it and they go, oh, yeah, our champion's overpowered now. Okay, I accept nerfs. I think, my belief, and I've said this before as a design team, I still say it now, I still believe this, that it is okay for us to ship things lightly on the strong side for players to get the appreciation of the changes of the champion, and then walk things down. And so it's like, here's Lissandra. We're going to make your passive feel better. We're going to make your Q feel better. We're going to make your ult feel better. These are all clearly power positive on a champion who's already relatively balanced 50% win rate. But like, hey, it's really hard to know exactly how much power is in the passive, how much power is in the self heal, how much power is in the Q slow. It's going to be some. And it's like, okay, if Lissandra's 54, maybe it's a micro patch. If Lissandra's like 51.5, oh, it wasn't that much power. Clearly some. We can wait a bit and let people appreciate their changes. I am personally a really big fan of doing things that way. And so it's basically just a bunch of strict power positive changes to Lissandra, and that's great. So now Thralls do not stop moving to like display their auto attack animation before exploding. So it's going to be more reliable that Thralls hit their target. Strict power positive to the passive. Thralls know if they're chasing someone already, and if it walks into a brush, they will happily chase that unit into Fog of War. And what's nice is enemies will actually see the Thralls themselves, so they know to run away from them. I think it's a very good change as well. So it's actually power negative here in this change, but I think it's a very, very smart change. So shout out Phlox, I think we did these change list, who did a really good job with this. Q now slows on the explosion bit. I think this is the correct change for the ability as well. I think it makes sense to be able to do this. It certainly can be a lot of power. Now you can slow someone for a gank assist. I think this is a lot of power. This is, I think, definitely very, very powerful. You can slow the Lissandra, slow the Seraphine, slow the Syndra, slow the whatever. So if your Lee Sin comes to gank, you're like, well, I'm gonna land this Q slow. It's gonna be much easier to gank them. It's a lot of power, right? And ganking Gremlin is gonna be much, much easier. It's gonna be really, really big deal. You can now Q flash as well. So Q will cast from the position of post cast instead of pre-cast. So yeah, you can Q flash. Another bit of power here. Not a huge one, but there's a lot of high skill Q changes to Lissandra, certainly. The flat heal on the R is going up by a flat 10. That doesn't matter very much. But the AP ratio is getting more than doubled from 25% to 55%. This is still a fairly mediocre AP ratio. It's also a fairly mediocre heal, all things considered, but now it's just not horrible. Also, the max heal value gets achieved at 30% max health instead of 0% max health. So also a very large buff to the total amount of healing going up by as much as 15%, I believe, at maximum, right? Instead of getting 185%, you're getting 200%. So, or 170%, sorry, you're getting 200%, which is about a 15% increase. So at some points, there's up to 50% more healing that we're going to see. Time for some numbers changes, basically just the R. But yeah, accounting for a typical 3-item build on Lissandra, a pretty solid 35-ish% increase. Keep in mind, again, it's going to be another multiplicative 15%. So, maybe 55% more total healing on Lissandra in a real game. Definitely pretty meaningful. You don't always self-R, but when you do, it's going to be 50-ish% stronger. You're not usually going to self-R at full health, and if you do it, of course, it's nothing anyway. Neither the AP ratio change or the missing health change is nothing. But yeah, low health self-R are going to be a lot better. Certainly can be some really meaningful stuff where you can heal for 700 health, and that's, at least it's not nothing this time around. So beautiful stuff here. I mean, a fair bit of power. These aren't massive, huge, but we'll see what happens. We'll see how much Lissandra gains. And if there has to be a nerf, there can be a nerf, but I think Lissandra's going to feel really good next patch. So next up is the change to Emilio. We're nerfing two supports who are very big in pro play. Rell needs to be nerfed because of solo queue. She's the #1 support in pro, but last I checked was like 75% presence, which is fine. Emilio, though, after the nerfs early on in the season, I think in like 13-11 or 12, still doing overall too well. We're continuing to chip damage off of Emilio as the primary consideration. I want to point out the changes that we did with Lulu back in point 12, I think it was, or point 13. basically lowered her early trading, lowered her early durability, but raised late game shield power. She lost less than 1% win rate in solo queue on average and disappeared from pro. And so the ability to say like, hey, your enchanter outputs are better, but your lane bullying is going down is a really effective way to push out of pro while retaining a fair bit of solo queue power. Doing somewhat similar things here with Emilio, where a lot of your lane bullying, a lot of your coordination with teammates is going down. And hey, your average solo queue AD carry is going to have a hard time coordinating the move speed with you. It's going to have a hard time applying your passive because they're just not going to realize it. They're not going to time out as correctly. And so these are going to have disproportionate effects on pro play. The coordination required aspects of the champion, if those go down, the rest can remain strong. And if we get to 0% pro presence Emilio, we can buff Melee for solo queue, right? And that's totally reasonable if we want to do that, if we think Emilio should gain some more win rate. So those are the changes here. Let's talk about the numbers on them themselves. This is accounting for a champion with no bonus AD, just the Emilio passive like AD to on hit conversion plus the burn, accounting for Emilio's like a pretty normal 0 to 3 item build for him as well. And the amount of damage coming through the passive is down about 25%. The amount of move speed you give to your teammate is down 20%. Just to like see the numbers more clearly, this is what a double stack E will do. It's worth pointing out that Emilio has a normal length shield in 2.5 seconds, but because the move speed duration has to match the shield duration for all the double casting shenanigans, I mean, this can be a 5-second long move speed boost that you can double up, and having a 25% move speed buff for 2.5 seconds that turns into a 50% move speed buff for another 2.5 seconds is a lot of mobility to give someone over the course of a very large amount of time. And so lowering the amount of move speed this thing gives is pretty reasonable. We cannot lower the duration here really at all. I really didn't want to mess with the muscle memory of how long you can wait for your second cast here, and ultimately just saying, yep, okay, move speed down, burn damage down. This is obviously power negative strictly to Emilio, but again, hopefully in a pro skewed manner. That's hopefully pretty reasonable. And again, the goal for pro play is 2-to-1 tanks or melee champions compared to range. Like, it's okay to have some melee, it's okay to have some Lulu, some Soraka, have them once in a while, but primarily be an aggressive focused metagame in pro for support is, I think, the best look for this, where you're going to have a more action-packed bot lane. It's not just farm and scale. The supports want to go and roam and make action elsewhere. All these things tend to be really fun to watch and positive for the game. So yeah, as much as I know we've seen the lamenting of, oh, it's just back to Leona Nautilus meta to some degree, that's still way better than Melia Lulu meta, right? I think 90% of us would agree that we'd much rather have Leona Nautilus every game than Melia Lulu every game or Yumi Lulu every game. Again, would like some mix, right? Let's have some enchanters be viable, but Melio is the number 2 presence support, and we are nerfing Rell primarily because of solo queue, and so Melio has to go down in order to retain a good-looking meta game in pro play, and so I think we're going in that direction. Okay, next up is Rek'Sai. The nerfs we shipped in the previous patch were not enough. We went for early health, early AD. They had a meaningful hit, and they were somewhat elite skewed, but basically doing some of the changes that I'd wanted to do for a while, which is shifting more and more champions toward total AD. I'm a big fan of total AD ratios. It helps to spread out champion power. I think... So I've said before that I think it's really valuable to have champions of all win rate curves across all roles. So some early game champions, some late game champions, right? Have some Dariuses, have some Kales. That's great. Cool. Let's do that. I think it's useful to have Callistas and Lucians and Aphelioses and Jinxes and Zeres. Like it's good to have all those things, right? That's powerful. It's positive. It helps keep games feeling different. Roles, right? Each lane can provide something different to you. But I think the scariest role to have early game skewed champions is jungle, because in a 1v1, it's like, okay, as long as I don't feed Darius, I know I'm going to outscale him. And you can kind of take agency if you're 1v1, and it can still be frustrating to lane against Darius. He's a high ban rate champion, but I think it's kind of manageable to say, like, okay, but as long as I don't feed Darius, I know we're going to be okay. I will outscale him. It's going to be fine. Like, Kayle is actually a really good matchup into Darius as long as you don't get your lane frozen. And he's like, well, I can ult his ult targets. I can feel really good in team fights at really shutting him down. And I for sure could get outscale this dude, right? Not that you win lane, but game-wise, you're going to feel pretty good. Okay. Difficulty with junglers is what does a Mumu jungle do when Rek'Sai is in the game? You can't counter gank her. You can't like, well, I'll run away if Rek'Sai invades me. Rek'Sai's not invading you. Rek'Sai's killing your top laner, and you, as a jungler, cannot stop her. You have no say in this. Your top laner dies if Rek'Sai says so. And as a top laner, I'm like, all right, I'm laning, I'm Garen, we're chilling, we're vibing. I warded. Nah, sorry, dude. Rek'Sai dodges wards, jumps over the wall. Guess you die. You have no choice. It's just like, this is just true about really, really good early ganking junglers. And it's the scariest role to have really strong agency in the early game. I don't know what a healthier outlet for early jungle agency should be. Like, if we spawned more scuttle crabs or something, I'm not saying it's like the actual solution, but it's like we spawned more scuttle crabs, and so junglers can contest these like frequently present neutral objectives. And because Rek'Sai is a better duelist than Mumu, Mumu has to give up the like first 7 scuttles that spawn between minute 3 and minute 6. And so Rek'Sai got her team a lot more vision. Like, again, this is not the actual change, but something along those lines is probably a lot more palatable, where like Rek'Sai got some kind of really cool team-wide bonus from her early agency. I think a much more acceptable outlet, but really what early game junglers do is just end top lane. And that sucks for top laners, it sucks for the enemy jungler, and it sucks for everyone else who just like watched top lane have a 2-0 Darius because Rek'Sai showed up there, and there's nothing the other guy could have done about this. So I think, there's probably a lot of early jungle agency needs to go down. Directionally, I talked about like, hey, well, we're buffing Aatrox skilling a bit. Like, I think generally speaking, we should try to nerf early jungle pressure. This is what happened with Kindred this patch. It happened with Rek'Sai and Kindred last patch, actually. It's happening with Rek'Sai this patch. And I think trending this way is healthy for the game. There's also some system changes to do this thing as well. So let's talk about the numbers themselves. This is just a flat 5 damage off of the Unburrow. This is just, it's 5 damage, right? Your ganks deal 5 less damage. This is also an AoE ability, so if you go clear raptors, you'll do 5 less damage to all of the raptors. There's a chance this makes you wait 1 extra second for your jungle pet to deal 1 more tick of damage. I don't know for sure, but it's 5 less damage when you're ganking. It's 5 less damage on each of your clears. It is something. It's not a huge amount, but it is something for that one. Other one, though, is Furious Bite is going from a mediocre base damage and a high bonus AD ratio to a non-existent base damage and a somewhat lower total AD ratio. So here are the numbers of Rek'Sai. This is a full Fury hit. So double damage, true damage. Here is the base damage before, the base damage after. Rek'Sai does not learn E until level 3, so I cut out the rank 1 and 2, level 1 and 2, because they don't exist. So if you have 0 AD, you ran attack speed and armor for your stat shards. Technically the base damage is a bit lower, 1 through 6, and then finally at level 7, your base AD, just your AD growth takes over. Of course, it's still plus 5 damage per rank, so level 8, 10, 12, 13 don't change any of the breakpoints here other than adding base damage on both sides here. But of course, as you gain champion levels, of course, the damage goes up. So it's nerfed early, buffed late. Okay, but let's account for an actual item build. Again, this is a little bit fraudulent because I'm interpolating from level 1 to level 18, a 3-item Rek'Sai build, which I believe is like Stride Breaker, Cleaver, Death Dance. I forget what it actually is, but something around like that. And it's like, well, actually, if you are at a 3-item build at level 18, and maybe this is slightly too skewed, maybe you have a bit more gold than this or a bit less gold than this, whatever. But if you're at a 3-item build at level 18, you get the same amount of damage. But of course, you can't go beyond level 18. But as you go towards item 4, well, the AD ratio is lower, right? So item 4 and item 5 is a weaker character, but your early snowballing is substantially weaker. Your mid game is fine. And if you're actually gaining levels faster, you're gaining gold, you're actually going to be in the green, right? Because like if you're gaining items about as fast as you're earning XP, then right, this is 2% less damage, like whatever. Like we nerfed your first few ganks, we didn't really nerf your mid game. But if you are down in gold, well, you're in the green then, right? And if you're a super head in gold, if you're snowballing, your early ganks were successful, you're going to be more in the red because the ratio is lower. So overall, I think this is a successful set of changes. It is basically strict nerfs to Rek'Sai because this is the real world Rek'Sai E damage, and it's clearly in the red, especially in the early game. I mean, the fact that, like, again, coming out of the jungle with a 150 true damage nuke, single highest damage ability in the game, right? 10 plus 1.4 times my total AD true damage is a lot. So yep, those are the changes here. This, again, strict nerf here. I mean, realistically, a strict nerf here as well. This does, to be fair, nudge very, very slightly toward Tank Rek'Sai. I think we are nowhere close to Tank Rek'Sai being the build, but it's something we do have to keep in mind that as AD ratios get nudged down, there is slightly less and less and less incentive to build attack damage. We have to watch this. We have to be cognizant. We have to be mindful of this, but I don't think we are close to making Tank Rek'Sai the primary build, though it is, again, has to be on our minds that, she needs AD ratios to make AD builds good. She needs some kind of health ratios to make sure that she likes things like Stridebreaker and Cleaver over just going Yomu's, allowing her to play a longer combat pattern, to regenerate the passive, come back in, have that fighter pattern be successful, allows her to not just always build full assassin. Next up is Rell. This is the first patch where I am taking over balance of Rell, as that I am the designer making sort of some of the choices and the implementation. It was handed off from Champions team to the Summoners Rift team. I had a very hard time finding a good change list here for Rell. I talked about it in the patch preview video, but essentially there's lots of things that are relatively sacred on Rell. She has to feel fast. She is a horse lady. She has to be the fastest support in the game. So we have to be really careful if we're going to nerf E or if we're going to nerf W, we have to be really careful about that. Rell's base damages are very, very low. We can't go much lower on Q, W, E, or R. The damages are already on the low side. Damage helps carry satisfaction. Satisfaction is the primary goal when designing a champion. And so essentially finally landed on things that are low satisfaction but still powerful. We know base stats are a very easy lever to hit here. We know that she prints free resists via, if she's dismounted, she gets 12% bonus armor and MR. So no matter how bad those numbers are, she gets more of them just by being dismounted, and she's going to be dismounted about half the time. So, she's going to make up for it instantly by being dismounted. And of course, she makes up for it with her passive, which is a way to take some power off the champion. We're double hitting her baseline durability here via this, but I really could not find better levers here than this that didn't really risk getting rid of the primary important satisfaction pieces of the champion. There are some interesting QL changes coming in. So the designer who shipped the Rell midscope had some free time early in the week and is I think there's 3 or 4 changes that he's planning on shipping in 0.15, which I think are looking really cool. So there's a QL update to Rell coming in 0.15 by the midscope designer. I think it's gonna be really sick. Just some more nice updates. So I guess I'm always really happy when a designer wants to follow up on their work, and I think that's cool to see. So it means we're gonna see Rell in the patch once again next patch, but for good feels changes here. So we can talk about the math here in terms of how durable Rell is. So here is her baseline armor before and after. Here is what that means for physical durability if you don't itemize anything and aren't dismounted, which is a little bit fraudulent, but worst case scenario, it's about 2% less durability. Here's if you fully stack the passive, right? Because the baseline minimum steal has been dropped by about 1/3, as has the shred been dropped by about 1/3. If you fully stack the passive, here is the durability difference, and it's basically about twice as impactful as the base stats were. So up to 3.5% less durability in a I've landed 5 stacks, period. I've hit one person 3 times, someone else twice, whatever. This is, how much you're getting as a result of this change. So definitely going to be a nerf. Rell is very overtuned, especially in elite play. She is elite skewed. I believe she's less elite skewed than she was before the midscope, though, again, very, very high win rate in really high elos, so a necessary change. So next up is Rengar. Rengar is another very elite skewed champion, doing incredibly well, super high elos. Very one-shotty on the assassin build. Also, actually a more successful top laner than jungler. Now, top lane Rengar only really builds about 1 crit item, so this is not going to nerf him very hard. The base health regen should do a little bit more for that lane in nerfing top lane, but this is overall basically, the amount of damage coming into the queue with high crit builds. You're going to be doing a lot less burst with the ability. Meant to be a nerf, meant to be, overall less burst on the champion. Not much to say here. Nerfs to Rengar, who needs them. He got nerfed a little bit with the Essence Reaver and Storm Razor changes from the previous patch. They did nudge him down a very little bit. Not enough. He's still a very, very strong champion in elite MMRs, and so a nudge in both directions, both the top lane and to jungle. Kind of one part to each one. So Rengar nerfs, not much to say here. Next is the change to Shaco. We had Shaco on the docket for a little while. We know AD Shaco has been underperforming. AP Shaco is slightly overperforming, but not by a large degree. But AD Shaco definitely pretty weak is his primary build, and so a increased AD ratio to deceive, an increase to the backstab ratio on Deceive itself as well, and then some other minor things Prowler's Claw will now show during the clone. Boxes don't add a lightning, Hextech AoE, and Zero Q does the right amount of damage, so not quite as one-shot, which is good as well. So we can talk about what that means to Shaco. So on his normal 3-item AD build, here is the total damage of the Q plus the auto attack. Keep in mind this, right, his total AD is in there. The base damage of Q is in there. About 45% of Shaco's max Q second, so I chose that as the skill order here. But a small damage increase to the Q itself, although if you backstab and you get the extra damage from 40% increase to 50%, 55% increased, you get a much significantly increased damage to the Q here, so a solid, and you're going to use this like when jungling, right? Like you're going to, if you learn Q at 2, which seems to be the most common build for him, then when you go backstab the blue buff or whatever, or red or whatever, that backstab Q is going to do 12% more damage, so hey, your clear is a little bit faster there as well. Of course, the bigger thing is the actual PvP damage, which is going up, right, pretty meaningfully so. So solid buffs to AD Shaco. Next is a pretty sweet patchwork going on to AD Shyvana. AD Shyvana has been pretty weak for a while, and so it's basically, hey, Qmax second has a higher AD ratio. E, which you could choose to 1-point wonder in an AD build. Well, this percent on hit damage is static. It's just 3% no matter what rank the ability is, but now it has a bonus AD ratio on this one as well. Shyvana gets some extra attack speed after the Q, so not only is the Q going to do more damage past rank 1, but the Q is still going to give you more attack speed. Now, to be fair, even AP Shyvana is going to be able to use, the same flat damage in rank 1 and get to use some extra attack speed to just, get a few more autos off, though the Q is going to reset a little bit slower. Ultimately, probably relatively power neutral to AP Shyvana, but yeah, as you get bonus AD, you're going to feel this a lot better. You're going to use the attack speed to apply more procs here, and it's all going to feel pretty positive. So here is assuming you're going to max Q second here, and looking at a example 3-item build, which I believe is something like I think it's something like Bork, Sunderer, something, Wits maybe, I forget, but a 3 AD build Shyvana, the total damage of the Q is this, right? It's once you get more points into it, it's a solid increase of the damage. Of course, again, there is a big attack speed attached to it afterwards, so you're going to get about 1 extra free auto attack, which is another like 1.0 total AD attached to the ability, which is a very, very big deal. And then again, using that same example build of getting bonus AD, about how much more damage is the E on hit proc damage doing, and it trends towards up to like 40% more damage, which is pretty good. So some pretty sizable buffs to AD Shyvana, which is cool stuff. Very good changes here. I love it. Volver is another top laner that wasn't doing very well, and I was like, okay, well, I want to buff him. I want to buff him in a scaling way to give top laners, nudging top laners towards scaling agency. The actually most, I think the single, I guess tied for the most common first item on Volver is Iceborne and Nashor's Tooth. There's actually a very large cohort of AP Volver players, and so I wanted to give AP Volver a meaningful buff here. A sizable AP ratio increase to the passive is a very large increase in damage here. There's actually a thing with Thundering Smash, so basically there is a auto attack reset that is on a delayed execute after you land the Q. And so if you had high attack speed, aka you're playing AP Volver with an Nashor's Tooth, you would actually start and then stutter your auto attack and then complete it. And so there is a 0.15 second delayed auto attack reset after landing Q. The auto attack reset is gone. After, it's just, there's nothing there after the Q lands. Q itself is still a reset. It's landing the Q had a delayed reset. So that's gone. So you're going to feel a lot better. It's just going to feel smoother. You don't feel this, by the way. If you're a normal level 18 Volver with no AP, you do not feel this change. If you are a high AP, like your Nashor's Riftmaker level 18, like you've got some more attack speed kind of going on, you actually do start to feel this. So you'll feel this on a developed AP Volver build. The other one is a Frenzied Maul heal increase from 0 to 4% more missing health. So even if you don't have a lot of extra bonus HP, you will still have some missing health, and the amount that's going to heal is increased by up to 25% on the ratio. It's actually pretty meaningful. So we talk about the numbers here. So this is AP Volver, and this is a linear interpolation, or nearly linear interpolation, from basically just the Doran's Ring and stat shards up to Nashor's plus Riftmaker. That amount of AP just slotted in at your level 18 ability power mark. So, you're really going to feel all the AP by here or something, but just doing smoothly. Either way, it's about 50% more damage to the passive, which is a very big deal. 50% more lightning damage to the primary tool of AP Volver is a very, very large buff. AP Volver, this is right. This is a very big tool for you, and it's 15% stronger. And this is if you don't build anything but 2 AP items and go full tank. Hullbreaker, Visage, etc. The healing itself, of course, at rank 1 of the ability is unchanged, but around here you get rank 2 of the ability, and congratulations, here you go. Doing very, very standard builds. You've got a really solid, like if you're at about half HP, I'm just using half HP as your benchmark here. 15 to 20% more healing. And of course, the lower you get, the better it is. Of course, the higher you are, the less you're going to feel this. But hey, AP Volver does 15% more passive damage. Roughly every Volver does 15% more W healing. Someone called these placebo buffs on Reddit before. Y'all are bad at math. You call this placebo buffs. Like, I'm not saying this is 7% win rate, but like these are very clearly meaningful buffs to Volver. Both the AP build and the Bruiser build. Heart to the top lane Volver players. And what's nice, a little bit here, right, is Jungle Volver won't get a second point in W until level 8. And even then, it's 10% becomes 11% missing HP. Like, it's going to be much less felt here. And so this gets to disproportionately buff top lane Volibear, right? That's the goal. That's the dream. That's the hope. That's what we're doing at this one. And again, right, the output here scales with gold income. It scales with you living in the fight longer and withstanding and maintaining and going. And, I think that is a relatively healthy play pattern for a Volibear. I played as this myself earlier on when we were going to ship it in the previous patch and then delayed it. This feels really good overall. I think this is, these are cool changes. I'm happy with them. Zeroth gets a big patchwork update here as well, trying to shift Zeroth towards being a better mid laner and a little bit away from support. So base mana down by 59 means just, hey, less spam for Zeroth until he gets himself to the last chapter. In fact, mana surge also getting weaker unless you start last hitting minions. And if you are last hitting your teammates' minions as support Zeroth, you're kind of a bad person. Even if you last hit, this is like on a 12-second cooldown, right? So it's like last hitting 4 things per wave is the break even here. Almost 0 support Zeroth, last hitting 4 things per wave, right? So support Zeroth gets fewer mana surges. Mid Zeroth gets more mana surges. Support Zeroth gets less base mana. Mid Zeroth finishes the last chapter at level 5. You can also hit turrets to proc mana surge. This helps if you are winning a lot as mid Zeroth. You clear the wave, it's up, and you get to go attack the turret. This can be pretty scary, though. Not a lot of mid laners attack the turret. We believe this is going to be actually a support skewed output here. It's much easier for regular support Zeroth to be like, yep, they're under tower, dunk, just grab it and just not get hooked by Thresh or whatever. But overall, it's going to just feel better for the Zeroth player. So I think, a positive change. The really big change, though, is Rite of the Arcane has +1 cast. Even though the base damage to base ratio is lower, you get bonus damage per successive hits. I saw people on Reddit call this a nerf to Zeroth, and I'm gobsmacked that people are this bad at math, as though getting more shots is not a substantial buff. So we're going to do the math 2 ways here. So first of all, here's the base mana. Again, the more levels you get, the less it matters. The more you trigger mana surge, the less this matters. The more Lost Chapter and Mana Flow carry your mana pool, the less it matters. But here's the base mana pool before and after the champion. Okay, great. Let's move on. So let's start here. This is if the ramping text literally doesn't exist. If this text doesn't even exist, what is the theoretical full damage of R? And then before you say, well, you're not going to land all the abilities, cool. This scales linearly with your accuracy. Like if you on average land half your shots, it still does 20 to 10% more damage. Because instead of landing 1.5 shots, you land 2. 20% more damage. That's the math. R is strictly buffed, not even counting successive snipes landing, which exists, by the way. So if it does land, look at these numbers. And this is, by the way, trending toward 3 items Zeroth. Now, to be fair, Zeroth's most common 3rd item is Death Cap, so this is a pretty lofty 3-item build, but it's, again, level 18 3-item build is reasonable to finish Death Cap here. Yes, your max rank ulti, if you land every single shot, deals double damage. That is a lot of power. Now, I don't expect you to land all 6 shots. I don't think anyone expects you to land all 6 shots. But if you do, this ability has double the damage it used to. That is a very big deal. That is a very large buff. even at rank 1, it's 50% more damage in a situation where you land everything. That you don't always land everything, so the real answer is somewhere between this and this. By the way, that's still a lot of power, right? This is very clearly a very large strict buff to Zeroth, unless all of your ults are you cast R once and then walk away. But if you're like, oh, my accuracy is low, well, cool. You're going to trend toward this, where you have more shots, so you're more likely to land 1 or 2 shots during the ulti instead of 0 or 1 during the ulti. This is a strict buff to Zeroth. The passive change, I think, right, is a, like, this whole stuff is just a shift toward mid from support, and this makes you really, really care about the last rank of the ulti because of how much this ramp up actually matters and how much damage you can possibly deal. I think it's a great set of changes, like really cool stuff. Overall positive, I think is really cool for Zeroth. Zyra gets an update to make her a better jungler and other stuff. So now the plants will take 3 shots to die to AoE spells. Although 1 AoE spell plus 1 auto attack will still do the 8 requisite damage to kill the plant. 2 ranged autos always did enough to kill the plant, so no different there. The big change is instead of doing 1.5x damage to monsters, it now has a flat bonus damage to monsters. So this is what am I doing? Oh yeah. So this is Zyra's. Now to be fair, you can't do it at level. Well, yeah, you spawn season passive. It is like this. Here is again trending toward a 3-item build for Zyra. This is Leandri's, Riley's demonic. Trending toward a 3-item build for Zyra. How much monster damage is Zyra going to do? And it's substantially up in the early game, aka a much better early jungle clear for Zyra. That slowly falls off as you get more ability power and as you get more sort of champion levels. That's fine. I don't know if Zyra jungle is going to actually be good, but it's certainly going to be a lot stronger, and so we'll see. Getting a 2nd seed when you first learn W at level 2, also pretty big deal. Helps you with the clear as well. Helps you with even some lane bullying. So overall positive things. R is now cast on max range, like no matter where you press it. I think this is a very good change overall. And it's going to be much quicker at finding a champion to deal damage to them as the R expands. All fun stuff there. Okay, next up, a suite of scaling item changes disproportionately used by solo laners. And overall just some items that are looking a little bit weak. So some assassin buffs here where Axiom Arc is going to be pretty much the same item on 2 items, then strictly better on 3, 4, and 5. So Axiom Arc as a bit more of an assassin capstone to get some ulti resets and maybe get a 2nd ult off in a team fight. Cool, Axiom Arc really has no users. It's now a better capstone option. Great. Gale Force, a simple nerf here. Gale Force isn't OP for most players, but it is OP in the hands of pros who are good at using active items. Unsurprisingly, letting AD carries actually die when they're caught is a positive. If at any point they are weak, there are other buffs out there, but them not having as frequent a dash away, positive for the item overall. Generally, and for champions like Jhin and Neela, who are pretty bound to Gale Force, they've got other options, or not so much they have other options, but they have the win rate to spare, I should say. And then someone like Caitlyn or Jinx can switch over to Infinity Edge, which is very, very lightly buffed this patch, and is already a performant option on them, so they can just kind of shift items. Yasuo and Yone can shift to Infinity Edge, which is also very much buffed for them. They're going to really like the option. And overall going to be, I think, League of Legends is a healthier game when Gale Force is not one of the most common AD carry mythics. I think it actually should be 4th place. Infinity Edge getting a very light buff here. So what this maths out to be is at 2 items, you have about 1% more auto-attack DPS and about 1% less spell damage. So if your damage mostly comes from spells, this will be a nerf at 2 items. If your damage mostly comes from auto-attacks, it is a buff at 2 items. As you go to 3 items, it's like 1.5% more damage, and as you gain base AD and as you gain items with AD on them, the difference of 5 AD gets lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser. As you go to item 3, item 4, item 5, on a full build, this is like 3.5%, almost 4% more auto-attack damage. Again, not huge, right? 3.5% more auto-attack damage is nice, but like it's not a huge buff, right? It's a light buff, because AD carry, like Infinity Edge is not underpowered, and AD carry is not underpowered, and so here's a light change. Like, and I kind of wish we shipped this with midseason actually, was reinforcing what IE does, and like, no, it is definitely a really, really cool crit damage item. I think this is the right shape. If, you know, it ends up that like, actually these champs are still underpowered and feeling bad, and give it 5 more crit damage, whatever, like, you know, it's fine to buff the unique aspects of this item. I'm super down to do that, but want the item to stand out, want the crits to stand out. Again, the item isn't actually weak, people just kind of aren't buying it, so This is a flavor win, which is a good thing, right? Flavor without power is positive. I know people on Reddit have been pessimistic, where it's like, well, you lose spell damage. Like, cool, you're not buying this on Xayah, right? You're buying Quick Blades on Xayah. Do that. So Prowler's Claw, just a very simple buff. It landed weak in the midseason, so 3 lethality, cool, bring it up sort of toward the bar. Random's Omen, so this was, so one of the tasks we took on was, one was ensuring carry tops were viable in pro play. This was looking at the fact that we are not nerfing K'Sante in this patch, though once that happens, we have some room around the other tanks, but in the meantime, we have to ensure that fighters are tuned pretty aggressively because K'Sante eats up a lot of pro presence, and that's why the Aatrox buffs, that's part of what like gave us the Aatrox Volver buffs as well, is like we expect Aatrox to come into pro play and take up some presence as we are, as K'Sante is being maintained right now. And we'll find K'Sante changes at some point. Like, we intend to ship K'Sante changes before Worlds. We're hoping to get them out. I'm not on the project right now, but it's moving in the right direction. I've talked to a lot of designers about it recently, like over dinner. I think what they're looking at are looking really good. So I think we will have good K'Sante changes that should feel good for their players and help with pro skew at some point in the near future. The other task, though, was, and I sort of duoed this with another designer, which is looking at the overall architecture of the item system of both AD carries and fighters, or rather bot lane and top lane, really, and nudging things toward the right direction. And so I took AD carry stuff, basically, and this is what, Gale Force down, IE up, keep Shiv in a healthy spot. Shiv is still a bit overpowered on the minion stuff. And basically he said, hey, there's a bunch of capstone-esque top lane items that people aren't really using right now. We should buff them into viability, so that there is a wealth of good sort of capstone feeling multiplicative fighter and tank items, so that you can say, hey, I got ahead in gold, I get to buy items that compound on themselves the way that AD carries can do this, right? Like AD carries get to buy attack damage and attack speed and crit chance and lifesteal and percent armor pen, and they have 5 stats that all in some way multiply each other, right? There's even move speed. Okay, yes, tanks and fighters have options to move speed as well. But it's like, hey, we have items like Randuin's Omen, Spear of Shojin, Steric's Gauge, that are all multiplicative, right? That have some modifier that, is a multiplier on my kit that, like, we should fight to make these things viable so that, if it's unused, more champs can use it. Try to get these things into mindshare a bit more. I really, really wouldn't mind if it got to a state where it's like, actually, you can tank a crit marksman for a long time. You actually want Azir or Ryze or Cassiopeia as a tank buster, right? I think the less that AD carries have unique team outputs, the more they're allowed to be selfishly satisfying. Because for the longest time, only AD carries are good at killing Baron. Only AD carries are good at killing turrets. Only AD carries are good at killing tanks. But it's like, I don't think those are what make AD carries uniquely satisfying. They're what make them really OP in pro, where games are really coordinated and they can funnel the gold to the AD carry to kill the tank, to kill the turret, to kill the Baron. But it means that if they're balanced around this kind of thing happening, and it's like, well, actually, we're going to rely on the mage to kill the Randuin's Gnar. We're going to rely on the mage to kill the Randuin's K'Sante. We're going to rely on the mage to kill Jax. Great. We can raise the power level of AD carries to where they're more self-sufficient. They're not as diveable, because now it's like, well, they're not just the inevitability of course, the late game AD carry wins the game, because there's tools to actually combat them. Great. They don't have to be tuned to get one shot by Rengar, or Rengar doesn't have to be tuned to one shot in AD carry. Same for Camille, same for Vi, all these things. So, right. And it's like, look, you can give these champions satisfying auto attacks that, like, they will still kill turrets pretty fast. They will still kill Baron pretty fast. They will still, rip through a Fiora who doesn't have her post on, because she's not going to build Randuin's second item. Spear of Shojin is not a tank item. Like, these champs are killable. You're still going to have that, but you get to gain as much XP as a jungler. And so you're not down 600 health in everybody, right? Like, that's a world I think I would like to trend toward. And so, giving outlets for double marksman team comps. I mean, we just had I forget if it was Lucian Callista or something, but G2 recently played Lucian mid. I know Tristana mid's been a really common thing. This has been happening a little bit because there have been viable magic damage in bot lane. Like we've seen Flacken play Ziggs and Seraphine recently, and we've seen actually more and more Ziggs bot around the world. So anyway, all to say there's a big ecosystem of things happening, but giving carry-ish options to make income matter in fighter and tank roles directionally shifts us towards that lane mattering more, being worthy of resources, being worthy of attention, being worthy of being a carry. They can withstand for a bit longer. So Randuin's Omen, its anti-AD carry option, is getting stronger. Spear of Shojin, 100 gold cheaper, 50 more health, an efficiency upgrade. Spirit Visage, 10 more MR. Sterix Gauge, 100 gold cheaper, 50 more health. Let's talk about those real quick. So Spear of Shojin, right, goes from 107 to 114% gold efficiency. Dragon Force, by the way, if you build it third item, if you look at Jax's most common third build that includes Spear of Shojin, it's worth about 21 ability haste when you get it. Of course, it doesn't affect your ultimate. It's only half value on the E, so I gave it a half value. I priced it at 10.5 ability haste basically. But this item went from, and then as you get low on health, you can get some move speed, which is some amount of value. If like we do. It's like something around here, right? Maybe if you get the full 15% move speed, you're something like this. Another 20% gold efficiency. This is a little bit fake, right? But something around here. Yeah, it goes from realistically this needs to be rolled in, so it goes from like 115% gold efficiency to 120% gold efficiency, and then sometimes exigency is online. Like that's probably around this item needs to be. Really, all it does is give big dumb stats. And a big dumb stat item being about 120% is, I think, pretty reasonable for a legendary. And so this is probably about where the item should live. And so great, Spear of Shojin gains some decent efficiency. Spirit Visage, similar boat here. I actually also put in where Abyssal Mask and Force of Nature are, which is, so you can kind of compare. Visage goes from 92% plus, and then its unique passive to 98 plus the unique passive. Seems pretty reasonable to me. If we look at Abyssal Mask, right, that's 90 plus Unmake, but to be fair, Unmake, like if you're in range of a champion, which is where you're going to use MR at all, and you have the stacks, it's also got 9 MR on it, which means it's actually 97% efficient, plus 9 MR per enemy champion nearby, plus the Unmake MR Shred, obviously valuable here as well. Very, very good item to clear. Abyssal Mask is a very, very strong item. Force of Nature, 85%, though that can be a little bit fake. Absorb can give you more, Dissipate can give you more, and if we add all these together, the item can be like 120% gold efficient. Move speed is often underpriced, but technically if we peg it against like Boots of Speed, this is typically the gold efficiency of the item, but 120%, right, looks pretty close to what this item is. So that's kind of the numbers here. Visage really needed the help, but if we can get Visage to the point where like, no, this is the item you feel good about buying on Mundo and Co and all these self-healers, and you feel good about Visage, great. It meets the bar. These other items, they're all 60 MR. Hey, look at that. Isn't that wonderful? It's got a unique effect. The efficiency, right, reasonably solid in these options. Great. So I think, positive changes. It is nudging the direction of, hey, fighters, if you get gold, you have a nice looking capstone. Next thing is Sterix Gauge, which actually jumped to that one as well here. So here's, this is using a level, I think it was a level 15 Illaoi as our baseline. Now Illaoi has very, very high base AD, but you buy this item right late, you buy it third, maybe even fourth, so it's going to be on a higher AD champion. But if you have like 130 base AD, it gives 65 attack damage, and it used to give 400 health, now it gives 450 health, and so it goes from a 108% gold efficiency to 160% gold efficiency on just pure dumb stats. The lifeline shield, if you price it at pure health, goes from 90% to 96% of the cost. That's pretty unreasonable. The shield, I believe, decays. I could be wrong. Actually, whatever, it doesn't matter. You're almost certainly not going to use the entire shield. It's pretty hard to do so, but it means that, yes, this is a very, very fat shield. It's, goes from a 1,000-point shield to an 1,100-point shield, 2,700 gold, 2,900 gold. This item should look in a pretty solid spot. And basically, this just helps it look worthwhile on more than just the really, really high base AD champions. It's still going to trend towards them, of course, because the more base AD you have, the more attack damage this thing gives, and it's where a lot of the power lies, right? A solid half of the item is in the attack damage, the other half is in some mix of the base health and the shield. Yeah, should look like a pretty solid option, open up to more viable users, and is a solid, like, hey, I need to go frontline, I need to absorb a chunk of burst, and then survive from there. So now it's up to Static Shiv. So nerf Static Shiv in the previous patch so that it no longer had the AP ratio on minion damage and cut 40% from 50 to 30. of the AP ratio off of PvP damage. So despite 2 strict nerfs to Static Shiv, LeBlanc is still an incredibly common pick. Some of this is that you can just simply use Minion Dematerializer, and as a solo laner, you only need to use really 1 stack. If you're a bot laner, use about 2 stacks on casters, and you're back to one-shotting caster minions. That's my bad for not accounting for that. I didn't realize it at the time. I would have tuned it lower sooner. My mistake, to be honest. It's my mistake. But anyway, once and for all, nerfing the damage below where it's going to one-shot caster minions, I think it's going to require something extreme for this ever to one-shot casters without some kind of kit intervention. But because a meaningful nerf to Electroshock PvE damage, going to give some attack speed back to it here. So here are the numbers on Static Shiv's gold efficiency. It was 100% gold efficiency, now it's 104. Ultimately, there's nowhere else to go. I don't want to increase the PvP damage here. I want to lower the PvE damage this is to 350, and say, okay, well, this is getting nerfed by about 20%. So some portion of the item is going down by 20%. Let's say it's 1/4 of the item. Okay, if 1/4 of the item is down by 20%, that's 5% off the item. And so that means the rest of the item goes up 5%. We retain balance, right? 5% gold efficiency in getting 5% attack speed makes up for losing 20% of 1/4 of the item. Roughly equilibrium. Okay, cool. And so here is the actual data table on the amount of damage that Static Shiv actually deals to minions. So instead of scaling from level 7 onwards, this was the table, it's going to wait until level 9 to start scaling. Essentially, AD carries can buy the item around this level, mid laners would buy it around this level, and so you had like this really big disparity, and this is why it's like, yeah, okay, if we're nerfing the PvP ratio on AP and we're nerfing the base value and you can't one-shot casters for free just with a Doran's Ring, then like that should be a pretty big LeBlanc nerf. The item was already like okay-ish on Yasuo and Yone, but not great, so I wasn't really that concerned. It was like fine on Quinn, who's having a good time using it. I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be enough of a nerf. Like, we're gonna move on here. It's gonna be a solid nerf. And then it's like, nope, wasn't enough of a nerf. And so, have to go a bit stronger. And so it basically says, okay, well, look, now if you are buying at level 9 or something, it's going to look like the level 6 version. You're not disproportionately much better as a power spec when you buy it on LeBlanc here. And you basically just, you're never going to actually reach close enough to cast minion health that even if you get 12% bonus damage from minion demat, you shouldn't get enough to where you're going to one-shot stuff. I mean, maybe it's just basically you're just not going to. The numbers don't line up anymore to where you can get the damage. And so outside of really extreme cases where you somehow funnel a ton of XP, you're just not going to one-shot casters anymore. And that's, the important change that it's just not there. It's going to require the auto attack, it's going to require volley, it's going to require ricochet. Off you go. That's the change here, right? The final change here to items is Trinity Force. So Trinity Force, basically, it's a very, very light touch. It's shifting the stack paradigm from 5 max stacks to 3 max stacks, because, it's shifting Triforce a little bit toward fighters. Without just like explicitly saying there's a melee to ranged character mod in this, because there kind of already is with the base AD consideration. Melee champions have more base AD than ranged champions. There kind of already is one anyway. But just saying, look, we're going to shift the item to be better in shorter fights. So it's going to take about 11 attacks before this item is going to, in total, deal less damage. That is a very long fight. That is something a marksman can do, rarely what a fighter can do. It's going to depend. It's going to be situational, of course, in all these cases. Again, the first 10 autos, it's going to be power positive as an item. So in any short trade, it's power positive as an item. So that's why there's a 2 attack speed nerf here. It's not a very large change. Again, it's just fidgeting around a little bit here, nudging it slightly towards fighters, slightly away from marksmen. If you're buying this in the jungle, you just have 2% less attack speed for your entire jungle clear until you get into champion combat. And then you have 2% less attack speed during that champion combat, but you have a little bit more AD for most of the fight. It's relatively power neutral. Again, it's just some shifts. It's a very, very minor change overall. But that's the change to Trinity Force. Just, spend the time investigating. Like, look, this item is honestly fine. The bonus health is only 300. Like, for a bruiser or fighter item, it's not that much bonus HP. It's not like suddenly turning Ashe into a tank. This isn't, Triforce Titanic Zeri, where it's like, oh, you're getting 800 bonus health in the build, you're just becoming way too durable. It's like, yeah, Ashe goes like Triforce into normal stuff. Like, it's fine. There's nothing too scary there. So again, I think it's fine that Trinity Force is usable on marksman. It is great. We shift it very, very lightly towards fighters, but nothing too big. Next change is another systemic change toward top lane, away from bot lane, very, very little bit, which is Ghost no longer going to get a takedown reset. Essentially, Ghost's best, most performant role is bot lane. It is fine in mid. It is fine in top. It is a little bit OP in bot lane. This is contributing to bot lane being very snowbally because Ghost lets you win more and finish a kill. You can't anti-burst with heal or barrier or cleanse as much because you should be running Ghost if you can help it. And so we're going to see people slightly run back towards going heal or barrier or exhaust or cleanse, away from Ghost a little bit, so a little bit less snowballing, a little bit less. Every AD carry has Jinx passive, every AD carry has resets. So the number of AD carry Pinnacle is going to go down a little bit. And it's just like, look, a little bit less hyper carry in late game via this. But hey, if you're getting only one reset in a fight because fighters, only last for about 2 kills, well, you're not going to feel this change because you're going to get all that duration front loaded. If your combat pattern is really long and you just don't get kills in the first 8-10 seconds, okay, well, you've got another 7 to finish the job. I think this overall remains pretty reasonable, remains pretty neutral for top laners. One thing this is going to do is it's going to make the level 1 fight stronger because you're going to have Ghost for a very, very long time in level 1 fight. That's definitely going to do something in, top lane Darius with Ghost, top lane, Hecarim's first jungle gank, whatever with Ghost, like those are going to be stronger, right? He's going to be fast for longer, but it's going to lower the amount of resetting. I think it's important that summoners are really low complexity, because everyone has them from the second you start playing League of Legends. I think it's important that they are pretty low complexity, so you don't add a lot of complexity to other champion kits that are already sometimes very complex. I think it's just kind of good for the system to be not complex. And yeah, cool. Basically a line of text going the way. The next big, I don't know, meaningful, whatever, systemic adjustment is to jungle. So this is saying, look, it is hard to find good, easy wins for top lane agency. Right, without like completely redoing how Dragon's Rift Herald work. That's a seasonal level change. That's not happening in the 13.14, 13.15, right before Worlds, any of these things. Can't do that. We can nudge early jungle ganks down, which we did. We can nudge early top lane durability up. We can nudge top lane late game carry potential up a little bit. But really, it's like, well, we should, to give everyone else a better shot, we can at least nudge early gank pressure down. In solo queue, for most elos, people just absentmindedly path bot the top and have their bot lane leash, which means for a large portion of players, junglers end up top side with double buffs looking for somebody to gank at level 3 or level 4. For the majority of League of Legends players, that is the world they live in. In higher elos, people will be like, oh, of course there's a path towards bot, but as we push away the number of hyper carries and as we make sure there's good fighters top, it means that, more and more, even high elo junglers are more willing to path towards top, or they'll split if the matchup's bad or whatever. But at the end of the day, a level 3 jungler shows up in your lane, level 4 jungler shows up in your lane with double buffs, and the amount of power they get from the double buffs are what I want to lower. And so range champions already have a pretty weak slow, so it's unchanged here, but the melee slow is reduced by 5% up until level 16, and the actual burn damage on Aggressive Cinders is down meaningfully, especially in the early game. Blue buff also down 5 ability haste until second blue. So also, late game blue buff is going to be worth more, which is just kind of a nice change. I think a positive change over here. So here is the amount of burn a red buff deals. It's functionally, unless your Twitch or Zyra steals the buff, they're not going to have a level 1 red buff ever. So, when you go fight your second buff, here's how much burn damage. When you go to gank at level 3, level 4, the amount of damage coming out of the red buff is halved. When you go for it level 5, cut by more. Level 6, back to halved. And then, as you go towards late game again, it catches up and the damage is not nearly as meaningful. But hey, it's a sea of red. And especially here, the amount of true damage coming out of red buff is halved for the first ganks. The slow also halved for the first ganks when Wukong or Maokai or whoever shows up. Of course, obviously their kits have CC on them, but the Hecarim keeps the red buff on you, so he chases you down. The slow halved, the burn halved. Great, right? Lower gank agency, easier for you to get away. Also, the ability haste they're getting from blue buff halved. So they're getting fewer free spells. It's obviously going to slow the jungle clear, right? They're going to burn the camps for less damage. They're going to have their abilities coming up less frequently. This objectively slows jungle clears by a small amount, but it slows jungle clears. And it's going to weaken the gank a little bit. It is a nudge. One thing we are actually undertaking right now is identifying the fact that junglers, if you compare season 8, so 2018, to more recently, junglers are doing like 20-25% more PvP damage in the first few minutes of the game than before, when other roles are up like 5%. So junglers have really been doing a lot more damage, specifically junglers. And it's like, okay, finding ways to tap that down, finding ways to maybe look at overall early snowballing, valuable stuff to look at, and valuable stuff to try to move in the correct direction of, but nothing to speak of just yet. Pretty long video. It is almost 1 a.m. for me. I'm not going to do a TLDR, but big set of changes here. I think, again, directionally, a lot of really good stuff going on here. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye-bye.